Lance Larsen is the author of two distinguished poetry collections, Erasable Walls and In All Their Animal Brilliance, the latter of which won the Tampa Review Prize and 3 other awards. His poems have appeared in many distinguished publications. He also sometimes publishes essays, including a piece that appeared in Quarterly West that was later designated as a notable essay in the Best American Essays for 2005. He's truly a distinguished poet. A professor of English at BYU, Dr. Larsen regularly teaches courses in poetry, creative writing, the short story, and American literature. As his former chair, I know that he is greatly respected as a careful, caring, and committed teacher. In 2005, he co-directed a semester-long study abroad program in London where he taught English literature and creative nonfiction. He currently serves as the associate chair of the English department and as a poetry editor of Literature and Belief. Dr. Larsen has served on the Literary Arts Advisory Panel for both individual and organizational grants for the Utah Arts Council. Former poetry editor of Gulf Coast, he has received fellowships and awards from the Cultural Arts Council of Houston, the Joseph Campbell Society, Sewanee, Writers at Works, and most recently from the National Endowment for the Arts. Lance lives in Springville with his equally distinguished wife, Jackie, and their 4 children. Jackie is a creative artist in her own right. Now it's my great pleasure to introduce Professor Larsen, who will address us on the topic, Coaxing the Muse, Thoughts on the Creative Process.
Thank you, Professor Tanner, and thank you for coming out this beautiful but chilly May morning. I'm very happy to have Jackie on the stand with me, as well as my 4 kids who are in the audience playing hooky today from their last days of school. A few weeks ago, I found myself conversing with a neighbor. After some small talk, he hazarded a question almost no one asks. So how do they come, these poems you write? Do you just sit down and concentrate? Or do ideas pop into your head randomly, like when you're working in the garden? A terrific question, one I ask myself frequently, especially when the writing is going badly. Throughout the ages, cultures have sought to tap into hidden reservoirs of creativity in any number of ways. In ancient Greece, you asked one of the 9 muses to sing you a song of wisdom. In 19th century Manhattan, you petitioned a phrenologist to read the bumps on your head and thus profile your personality. In early 20th century Vienna, you scheduled 2 years of special sessions with a leather couch and a not yet famous therapist named Sigmund Freud. Not having tested the above strategies, I have my doubts. This much is certain. These strategies certainly would be difficult to replicate in a classroom. What methods do work? This is the question I hope to explore today. Strategies to help us harness this power we only dimly understand. Thus, I've titled my address this morning, Coaxing the Muse, Thoughts on the Creative Process. At first, I thought I'd address the topic of creativity broadly, as it applies to all fields, visual arts, music, dance, the hard sciences, etc. Why not? After all, if you're not in over your head, as T.S. Eliot observes, how do you know how tall you are? I quickly realized, however, that even inside my field, I was hopelessly over my head. So I've decided to limit myself to what I've absorbed as a reader and writer and teacher of writing. I admit up front my own biases and blind spots. Still, I'm hopeful, perhaps even guardedly optimistic, that what I say about writing poems and essays and stories may shed light on your own creative endeavors and academic pursuits, whatever they might be. The first principle of creativity I stress in the classroom is straightforward. Read. If this sounds too simplistic, then let's dress it up. Immerse yourself in the discipline and gorgeous chaos of words. Let me illustrate with an anecdote. 15 years ago, while teaching a sophomore literature course at University of Houston, the history of the short story, I met a student named Ethan, whom I took an instant liking to. He was inquisitive, articulate, willing to engage the questions of the course, and he dressed in Salvation Army cast-offs, which added a welcome aesthetic uncertainty to class. When he asked one day if I would comment on a handful of his poems, I was flattered. I sat down with him after class. I read the first poem. Bad. No other way to put it. Thumb to the second. Worse. The third, no better. 5 or 6 poems in all mediocre. By mediocre, I mean undistinguished, highly abstract, vague, preachy, boring. But what to say to Ethan? Remember, he's right at my elbow, eager for praise. After fishing around for a diplomatic preamble, I finally hit on the following question. So, Ethan, who are the poets that keep you up at night? You know, the poets you can't put down. He beamed. Well, he said, I want to avoid being a copycat. Good, I thought. So, he said, I don't read poetry at all. I don't want anyone's style rubbing off on me. Not so good. What Ethan failed to grasp is that if we don't consciously seek the best models, we unwittingly put ourselves at the mercy of the worst. Sir Philip Sidney's advice, fool, look in thy heart and write, works pretty well if you've internalized the English canon and taken in a healthy sampling of the world's literature and translation. It works less well if you limit yourself to what pop culture drops into your lap. Sing-songy nursery rhymes in kindergarten, fake emotion trapped in greeting cards. We've received a lot of those. Advertising jingles for fast food, and the saccharine cooings that leak into our brains when we turn on our car radios. Each writer is a capacious storage tank containing a lifetime of reading and experience. If this is true, how can we expect refreshing elixirs to pour forth from our spigots if we have filled ourselves with stale pool water and artificial sweetener? We can change this. My advice to Ethan then, and to all would-be writers now, remains the same. Devour books. Good ones. Don't have time to discuss what I mean by that, but that would be another lecture entirely. But we should read eclectically and intelligently. Read voraciously. Consider what others have said about the importance of reading. Nobel Prize novelist Saul Bellow, a Jewish writer. Good writers are good readers moved to emulation. George Seferis, a Greek poet. Don't ask me who's influenced me. A lion is made up of the lambs he's digested. And I've been reading all my life. Should have warned you about that one. And Darrell Spencer, whom I studied with as a graduate student. Listen, if you're not reading 3 stories a day, you're not even in the game. Whether you are a reader moved to emulation, a poet digesting the lambs of a lifetime, or an eager grad student, reading is foundational. By immersing yourself, you'll come to understand the history and significant questions of your chosen specialty and develop a private sensibility or compass that will guide you as you become part of the conversation. In the best of all worlds, this enlightened, enthusiastic reading takes place naturally. In the classroom, a little Machiavellian nudge can do wonders to help things along. At the beginning of every semester, I require writing students to sign a contract charting a personalized reading journey of 700 pages. 700 pages beyond regular class readings. I have a few requirements. The reading must be literary, not assigned in another class, and previously unread. By the end of the semester, this contract results in a classic win-win situation. If students read the 700 pages, they hum with new poems and voices and have a shot at a passing grade. If they fail to read the 700 pages, they can repeat the class the next semester and read even more poetry. Win-win. I had a student once who grasped the potential of reading lists better than I did. In her perfect world, which she hoped to create on some distant planet someday, she believed in sympathetic readers, that these sympathetic readers would get equal credit along with authors for creating a given novel or poem. I mean, imagine that on the spine of a book, your name and Shakespeare right together. What is stopping us from metaphorically living in that world right now? The second principle I stress is equally simple. Write every day. And if not every day, then as regularly as possible. Everyone's heard a version of the following story, especially you musicians out there. An accomplished world-class pianist plays for an enthralled audience. Afterward, an admirer approaches the pianist and without thinking blurts out, "I'd give anything in the world to play like that." Yes, anything except what the pianist gave, 5.5 hours a day for 20 years. Certainly one can find accomplished writers who write in fits and bursts, binge writers we might call them. But in my experience, they are rare. Most successful writers, like concert pianists and competitive athletes, have consistent work habits. They have learned the secret of doing at least a little bit every day, of breaking down the eating of the elephant into constituent bites. Already I can sense unvoiced objections. Perhaps you're saying, "Wait a minute, I'm not a workhorse, I'm an artist, and artists always wait for inspiration." Maybe, maybe not. According to one source, Picasso once said, "I don't know if inspiration exists, but when it comes, it usually finds me working." Suppose you've made the decision to write every day. How long is necessary? That's one of the first questions my students always wanted to know. For Anthony Trollope, long enough to compose exactly 2,000 words, which he could almost always manage before lunch, even on vacation, sometimes in the middle of a sentence. Most writers count their labors in time, not pages. Edward Hoagland, an essayist, spent as much as 8 hours a day. Flannery O'Connor, a Catholic novelist, 3 hours each morning. Walter Mosley, a popular and extremely prolific writer, 90 minutes. If you don't like those numbers, go easy on yourself and favor the recommendation of the Faculty Center here on campus. A mere 15 minutes a day. More time is encouraged, but 15 minutes will do. Think of it. As a faculty member, if you enroll in the Publish and Flourish workshop and are willing to invest a mere 75 minutes a week, you too can qualify for encouraging emails, writing tips, and occasional chocolate bars delivered to your door through campus mail. You think I'm kidding. Some people do it for the chocolate. Though I've been writing seriously for some 20 years, I've only tried to write every day for the last 3 or 4. Let me mention 4 benefits I've experienced. First, I end up spending more time writing than I would otherwise. By my estimate, 2 or 3 times as much. Second, I spend more quality time, which is crucial. For me, quality time comes first thing in the morning. Goethe's advice rings true. Use the day before the day. Early morning hours have gold in their mouth. Third, if I write every day, I stay more engaged in the project at hand, more alive to its potential. As someone has said, skip 1 day, I know it. Skip 2 days, the work knows it. Skip 3, the reader knows it. The fourth advantage of writing every day came as a shock. I relish my writing time more than ever. It feels like a gift, not an obligation. An axe to the frozen sea within me, to borrow from Kafka. On my best days, I write my 15 minutes or hour and a half before I teach, before I leave the house, before I eat breakfast. Anything on top of that is pure gravy. I'm still an embarrassingly inefficient writer, as my wife can attest. I'm complaining to her constantly. One who starts 11 poems, finishes 3 or 4, publishes 2. Still, this is a process I'm comfortable with, on good days at least. As Samuel Beckett says, try again, fail better. Now for a third principle of writing. Let the writing lead you. In his seminal essay titled Not Knowing, Donald Barthelme argues, quote, "The not knowing is crucial to art, is what permits art to be made. Without the scanning process engendered by not knowing, without the possibility of having the mind move in unanticipated directions, there would be no invention. The best writers are constantly trying to discover what they didn't know they knew. Or as more than one writer has put it, how do I know my thoughts on a subject until I've read what I've written?" Most writers I admire do their best writing when they ask a question they can't answer, at least at first. Why should this be the case? As Dejuna Barnes, a 20th century novelist, has said, "The unknown room is always larger than the known." Richard Hugo advocates not knowing in a very thin but influential book titled The Triggering Town. He makes the point that any poem has at least 2 subjects. First, the triggering subject. Second, the discovered subject. The triggering subject is what causes the writer to sit down to compose in the first place. The discovered subject is that which reveals itself only in the writing that is serendipitous, intuitive, organic. Hugo argues that in most cases, if we dutifully stick with our first impulse, we will say more and more predictable things, and thus lead the reader into slumberland. By contrast, if we allow ourselves to drift a little and pay attention to the music of a piece, we will make discoveries we hadn't dreamed of otherwise. Discovery is the almost infallible litmus test of good writing. To paraphrase Stephen Dunn, till I'm surprised or frightened by something I've written, I don't have a poem. I like very much what Flannery O'Connor says of her much anthologized story, Good Country People, about a conniving door-to-door Bible salesman and one of his potential customers, a proud, ornery woman named Hulga, who has a wooden leg and a PhD in philosophy. I don't know what the link is between those two, but O'Connor puts them together for some reason. At a critical moment in the story, the Bible salesman steals Hulga's artificial leg. Ironically, this theft humbles Hulga and helps prepare her for God's grace at the end of the story. Here's the point I want to make. O'Connor explains that she had no idea that the Bible salesman would steal the leg till 10 or 12 lines before he did so. Because O'Connor was surprised, her readers feel that surprise on the page. What can we learn from this? We need to allow ourselves to write freely, letting story or poem lead us rather than vice versa. Most of my pieces, short poems or longer essays, begin with no more than an inkling, an itch, a hunch, a question. I write to figure things out. In early drafts, this often means writing badly. More often than not, however, the awkward and uncooked lets me see what's on my mind. Consider William Stafford's response when he was asked about writer's block. Quote, "I just look out my window and something almost always comes. And if it doesn't, well, I just lower my standards." Principle number 4, revise yourself into eloquence. This may seem to contradict principle number 3, but over time, the two principles work in tandem. Just as you must be willing to lower your standards and write sloppily and inventively, not knowing what you will produce, you must, at a later stage, step in and revise, ruthlessly. In a sense, we are each a Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde stuffed in one body. The not knowing, unpredictable Mr. Hyde, who invents wildly, versus the more measured, logical Dr. Jekyll, who shapes and edits the mess. One of the most crucial skill sets a writer can develop is keeping these two in balance. They must find peace with each other. Well, not peace exactly, but a tolerant standoffishness that acknowledges begrudgingly the other's necessity. If you privilege straight inventiveness, you end up with self-indulgent dreck. Privilege Mr. Editor, and you end up with proper and orderly dreck. Our goal here is to avoid dreck altogether, whatever its provenance. Ideally, you will become your own best editor, but most of us need someone else to weigh in on our work. Some of you may know the story of how T.S. Eliot's Wasteland, probably the most influential 20th century poem in English, came to its present form. In 1922, Eliot gave a rough draft copy to his bohemian poetry friend Ezra Pound. Yes, The Wasteland was once a rough draft. Pound liked it. He liked it a lot. In fact, Pound liked it so much that he recommended drastic cuts. Eliot's wife Vivian suggested her own cuts, and Eliot himself excised large sections. In the end, the published version came in at 434 lines, roughly half its original length. Eliot thanked Pound by dedicating the poem to him and calling him the better craftsman. Better craftsman, however, does not guarantee flawless writer. A few years earlier, Pound took a sheaf of his own poems to Ford Madox Ford for evaluation. Pound was trying to perfect a contemporary voice. He also had a very modest ambition of learning more about literature than anyone on the planet by the time he was 30. In other words, the stakes were high. So he took the poems to Ford, who read, then grinned at Pound's poor attempts, then laughed, then fell to the floor laughing. The poems missed the mark so widely. Fortunately, Pound had thick skin and went on to say of that experience, "That laugh saved me 2 years." Oh, that we could all be so gracious about critiques. My larger point is that most of us need someone to look over our shoulder at times and register an opinion. The key is to find the right someone. This might include a writing tutor, a teacher, members of a workshop, or an editor. In most cases, it should not include your fiancé or anyone else inclined to love everything you write. You want someone who can register a dispassionate opinion, if such is possible. I consider myself lucky to belong to a small but discerning writing group that meets every other Wednesday at 8 o'clock p.m. I can't tell you how often Susan, Scott, and Mike have saved me from myself. Many years ago, I tested some of these principles of invention and revision with my third grade son as guinea pig. I steeped him in example poems, tutored him in writing concretely, provided a simple repeating rhetorical structure, and turned him loose. We had one controlling rule, set by me, of course. Throw out any bad lines or revise them till they were compelling. Here's the poem he wrote. I asked him just before if he'd come up and read it. He's now 17, but he's very modest and said he'd rather that I do that. Maybe you could grab him afterwards and he'll read it to you in the hallway or something. So this is the poem. It's called New Body, and it was written when he was in third grade. If my nose was a bare nose, I could smell if dinner was ready from my friend's house. If my back had porcupine spikes, then I could roll around and spike a bunny and eat it. You can see why I'm reading this poem. If my index finger was a T-Rex tooth, then I could slice a cake with one finger. If my hair was a foot, I could jump on my head or hop to the circus. If my hands were spiders, I could take them off and put them on my mom's bed. If my legs were icebergs, I would chip pieces off to put in my drink. If my stomach was a painting, then I would hang myself on the wall and win prizes. It's not fair. He always gets all the laughs. My fifth piece of advice is this: fall in love with the world and take notes. Most writers possess an innate curiosity about what surrounds them, an engagement that can and ought to be enhanced. In short, I'm inviting us to become alive to what's right under our noses. An entry from Charles Darwin's journal illustrates the kind of enthusiasm I have in mind. As a young student studying at Cambridge, Darwin got caught up in a national mania for collecting uncatalogued beetles. The prize? Not money or medals or real estate in the Lake District, but credit for discovering a rare six-legged species. Darwin writes, quote, "One day, on tearing off some old bark, I saw two rare beetles and seized one in each hand. Then I saw a third and new kind, which I could not bear to lose, so that I popped the one which I held in my right hand into my mouth. Alas, it ejected some intensely acrid fluid, which burnt my tongue so that I was forced to spit the beetle out, which was lost, as was the third one." I'm not advocating a new source of protein for student diets, or arguing that you must prove your writerly sincerity by snacking on forest foragers, but I do recommend Darwin's passion and engagement. Nor is it enough to merely observe. Take notes as well, right on the spot if possible. Don't trust your brain to hold on to things. Most writers carry around a notepad or a stack of 3x5s on which to scribble. Old receipts, blank checks, the margins of a textbook will also do in a pinch. Sometimes writing is mostly about collecting and eavesdropping. It's almost as if carrying around a pad causes the world to open its doors before you. Henry James has famously observed, "Try to be one of the people on whom nothing is lost." William Wordsworth was such a person, sort of. He defined poetry as, quote, "the spontaneous overflow of powerful feeling recollected in tranquility." What he doesn't mention is that these spontaneous feelings often came to him in the evening after peeking at journal entries. Not his own, mind you, but those of his sister Dorothy, who proved a more astute cataloger of their habitual rambles around Grasmere. Though Wordsworth didn't give his sister sufficient credit for his own success, and I should say the poems are his, even if the inspiration came from her, he knew enough to crib from her journals, and I see that as a good thing. At home or on the road, whenever I reach for a piece of paper, you'll see why I think that's a good thing. My wife and kids groan, knowing that something they just said will likely end up in a journal entry or poem. Consider this passage from my son, quote, "You be Jesus, and I'll be the tiger keeping the wolves away." That one has made its way into an essay, a poem, countless class discussions, and now this forum. Luckily, when he said it from the back seat of a car seat in our battered Honda Civic at age 4, he wasn't aware of the need to copyright. Why are close observations so important? They sometimes represent indispensable clues, magical breadcrumbs into or out of the woods. A writer trained to see small will often intuit larger connections, as Blake has famously observed. To see a world in a grain of sand and a heaven in a wild flower. Hold infinity in the palm of your hand and eternity in an hour. A couple years ago, while serving as co-director of study abroad in London, I had the chance to take my children and several students to the Keats House in Hampstead Heath, just outside the city. This was the house where John Keats composed some of his most famous odes before moving to Italy for the climate and dying shortly thereafter at the age of 25 of consumption. While I was engaged by the historic displays and memorabilia at the Keats House, what caught the eye of my two youngest children were rugs. Not rugs per se, but what you can do on rugs if you're ambitious, incredibly buff, and under 10 years old. Sit-ups. 10 years ago, I would have written a high-minded poem about our visit to the Keats House and ignored the antics of Dylan and Tessa completely. But on this occasion, I had enough presence of mind to jot a note to myself. Certainly no one had mentioned sit-ups and Keats in the same poem before. This would be my angle. Much later, after returning from England, I found the note and went to work. Before I read the resulting poem, I need to explain a few things. In the poem, I mentioned Fanny Brawne, Keats's fiancée, whom he never married. I mentioned the odes, some of the most accomplished poems in the language. I mentioned Keats's theory of negative capability, a term he coined to describe the ability of the writer to erase the ego temporarily and become the thing observed, a bird walking down the walk, a piece of straw, even a billiard ball. I mentioned the veil of tears, his term for mortality, which can be transformed, according to Keats, into a veil of soul-making if we live our lives in a certain way. Sit-ups with Mr. Johnny Keats. At Hampstead Heath, where Keats convalesced after nursing his brother through consumption, my daughter lay down on the carpeted floor. Where the poet dashed off his theory of the permeability of souls, including those haunting sparrows and stray billiard balls, and named it after a one-eyed bantam rooster called negative capability, my daughter said, "Hold my ankles, okay?" In the borrowed cottage where Johnny coughed up his first flowers of blood, and the last great odes glistened like Buddhas dreaming of a nirvana called Fanny Brawne, I dropped to my knees. On a blustery Thursday, school teachers from Des Moines brushing past us to intone beauty or truth before a faded copy of a painting of Keats, my daughter grabbed her head, like a schizophrenic squeezing out the tortured voices, or a poet straining to hear the voices true. And she never thought, I am a poem. And I never said, we thus trade a veil of tears for a veil of soul-making. It was enough to clasp her blue shoes, still damp from jumping English puddles, and count slowly, out loud, willing her success in an unwinnable contest, forehead to knee, elbows to cosmos, cradled head, chasing the glorious banging heart. My final piece of writing advice: immerse yourselves in other disciplines. In other words, let other ways of seeing inflect your own vision. We have an elevated term for this in academia, interdisciplinarity. 8 syllables, I counted them. In my own work, I find myself especially drawn to the visual arts, most likely because my wife Jackie is an artist. Whenever I travel, whether for pleasure or professional development, I make it a point to visit art museums and take in the offerings, whether they be Cassatt's at the Norton Simon, Richter's at the Getty, or Claus Oldenburg shuttlecocks as big as cars in Kansas City, all of which have helped deepen, enliven, and complicate my understanding of 20th century literary arts. I count it a great fortune being married to a visual artist. She provides a second and more insightful set of eyes on all matters aesthetic, a perk I try to take full advantage of. Our discussions about art, when we can fit them in around piano lessons, soccer carpools, and science projects, are far-ranging and collaborative. We collaborate informally on projects as well. I scrounge antique shops for the raw materials of her collages. She reads early drafts. I help her brainstorm titles for her pieces. She reads early drafts. I help her frame and deliver her pieces. She, sometimes reluctantly, reads early drafts. More specifically, she helps me know when obscurity has set in like a paralyzing fog, or when I've created a literary still life, not only devoid of life, but dead on the table. A few years ago, when I had the opportunity to suggest cover art for my second collection of poems, I exercised spousal prerogative and recommended her art. When none of her current pieces turned out to be the right fit, I came up with an elegantly simple solution. Jackie, just paint a new one. Which she did. Here's a copy of it, which dovetails well with the concerns of the book. You'll notice a crow, a spider, and a salamander, emblematic of the animal life that stitches the book together. In the center stands Galileo, complete with telescope, a figure who stands in for each of us, very much in this world, but peering into the next, an inspired backyard tinkerer. Sometimes merely looking at a piece of art isn't enough. I want to see by writing, which opens up art in surprising ways. Poems about other works of art are called ekphrastic, from the Greek ekphrasis, which means to proclaim or call an inanimate object by name. I've written a handful of these about the art of Hieronymus Bosch, Fra Angelico, Marc Chagall, Joseph Cornell, and of course Jackie Larsen. I've also written a response to a photograph by Sebastião Salgado, the most celebrated documentary photographer alive, who takes stark black and whites of the world's underclass. Jackie and I had the chance of seeing his heartbreaking show titled Exodus 2 years ago in Salt Lake City, and hearing him lecture 3 years before that. What I admire about Salgado is that he refuses to treat any given individual as a category or a victim of circumstance, but instead celebrates that person's quirkiness, dignity, and resilience. When I happened upon this photograph, outskirts of Guatemala City, 1978, I knew I wanted to write about it. I've titled my poem Cottage Industry to suggest the kind of homegrown, pieced-together livelihoods of so many who have so little. Cottage industry. How many apples can a campesina carry on her head? Assume she is 6.5, that each apple is sticky with caramel, that her cardboard tray bends but doesn't buckle. The girl, bottom left, a study in doggedness and braided hair, threatens to walk straight out of the frame. Meanwhile, from inside a postage stamp of a window, top right, a woman, the girl's mother perhaps, watches. The planks between them are weathered enough for pathos. The woman's face, a diagram in chiaroscuro and waiting. So why insist on kinship? Isn't it enough to try and fail to keep both faces in focus at once? If the girl weren't bearing third world innocence, if the woman weren't pinned in place like a tin saint, maybe we could shrug off the sheen of those apples. 5 rows of 4. Their sticks point everywhere, like army compasses gone berserk. East is to west, as poverty is to always. And of course the apples might not be carameled at all, but candied. Who can say with black and white, which turns even the simplest colors theoretical? I mean 20 floating apples. I mean the one I singled out to buy but can't. I mean the one the girl is eating so casually, as if it were not money or her future. Before concluding, I want to make clear that I've merely scratched the surface of today's topic. I could have just as easily mentioned 9 tips for creativity, or 13, or 23. Last time I checked, which was this morning, taking pen in hand remains a messy, recalcitrant, but invigorating process that resists, thank goodness, my attempts to explain it. Still, the principles we've talked about can easily be applied to our various circumstances. First, the need to read, to immerse yourself in the literature of a field, is near universal. Second, establishing a daily habit of writing or similar engagement will take us into the heart of nearly any discipline. Third, letting the writing lead you, or having faith in the mysterious process of creation, will let you tap sources beyond your own limitations. Fourth, revising, regardless of the field, gives you the chance to revisit and improve upon early efforts, and in the process, take full advantage of the perspectives of others. Fifth, falling in love with the world and taking notes can help cultivate powers of observation otherwise left dormant. And finally, sixth, The insights garnered from other disciplines will help you see more clearly through your own lens. Sometimes when the work isn't going well, when I'm stuck, or when I fear that I've forgotten overnight what I've spent the last 20 years learning, I like to read a passage by Gordon Lish, a fiction writer, teacher, and infamously demanding editor. This was an editor who, without hired underlings, screened the hundreds of submissions that came across his desk each week. His strategy was simple. He read until he hit a bad line in a submission. If this happened to be your first line, sorry, you had your chance. On the other hand, if Lish made it to the second page of your 10-page story, you stood an excellent chance of being published. In any case, this terror of editors, Gordon Lish, sounds a remarkably generous note when he talks about our potential. That is, if we're willing to work hard enough. Quote, I see the notion of talent as quite irrelevant. I see instead perseverance, application, industry, will, desire, desire, desire. I'd like to end with a poem titled Neighing Horses Behind My Right Shoulder, another poem starring my daughter, this time on a road trip, playing with toy horses. The colt nuzzles her mother till a chorus of painted shivers passes from teat to purling mouth, as if the sky itself had speckled their Appaloosa backs with blessing. Are they less true, these ponies, for being bendably hollow, gestated the same wet afternoon in an aging plastics factory in Taiwan? Toy horses, all day through 3 states, across the plush blue of backseat upholstery, my daughter has galloped them. Now they sleep, touching noses, and now they swim through air. Pegasus times 2, times 7 shades of apricot violence the setting sun lays in our laps. What are these neighs that nicker through the car, but anthems we sing to falling dark, to galloping air? Thank you, wind. Ride me again. Amen. Thank you.